Earlier today, Ohio Governor John Kasich urged members of the Electoral College not to vote for him. Don't worry, Johnny. Just like the primaries, nobody's voting for John Kasich. The Trump Report starts now!
You're tuning into the destination for TV superfan discussion, AfterBuzz TV. And now, let the buzz begin!
Oh, yes. You can't always get what you want. And welcome to the show that...
This is perfect holiday cheer.
Welcome to the show that, honestly, none of us here and a lot of people in the media ever expected would be the show that we'd be doing after the election. The Trump Report. Let's go around the table. I'm your moderator, Christian Blatt, at ChristianDMZ. And to my left... camera right, for those of you watching on YouTube, and if you are watching on YouTube, go ahead and jump in the chat room, share your thoughts with us. The one and only Chelsea Galicia, at Chelsea Galicia, and at the far end of the desk, in a completely different time zone than me, Scott Moore, at SMan80. And so you see familiar faces from Trump versus Hillary, which we did during the presidential election, and you'll continue to see all of our familiar faces. Sometimes you'll see our friend Stephen Helmkamp. Sometimes Drexel Hurd will be around. Drexel needed a mental health year, I think, to take off for a little bit, but he'll be around sometimes. We'll also have some new faces. You know, we'll kind of rotate it in a little bit, but we also want to hear from all of you. So if you are listening to the podcast version on iTunes, make sure you tweet us at Trump Report ABTV, as in AfterBuzz TV, and that's where you can find the show. Follow us there on Twitter, like us on YouTube, comment and rate us on iTunes once we're up there, which we're not there yet because we're just doing our first show now. But, and so the title, the Trump Report, we are going to be bringing the latest Trump news, reporting on it. We're not going to necessarily start from an anti-Trump standpoint.
Necessarily.
Sometimes we might find ourselves there. Sometimes we'll find ourselves in disagreement.
Maybe a majority of the time. But
I'm going to start with something that I think is positive. I have two positives to start with. The first... And, when you, at the tip of the iceberg, I think this is positive. Once you break it down, you're like, all right, well, this is a little bit silly. But Donald Trump slamming Boeing, the costs for new Air Force One, says to cancel the order. Well, you can't cancel any orders yet. You have 6 weeks or so to wait for that. And he says it's going to cost $4 billion to build a couple new Air Force Ones. It's closer to $2 billion, but he has a point. Why are we spending that much on those airplanes? Let's take a look at that before we actually spend the money. Also, these are planes that we don't need for 10 years. So, can't you shop around? Well, find a better deal, Chelsea?
The funny thing is, I found out, or what I read, was actually he's right. Because not only is it going to cost about $2 billion to build them, but until like 2021, the total cost to maintain, I guess, is $4 billion. I guess that's where he got his number from.
And the research to go into it, and maybe he's mad because he'll never get to use it because he won't be president in 2021. I don't know. But
even if he gets 2 terms, he won't be president in 2021.
But here's the thing too that I think a lot of people
he
would be, but let's just hope he doesn't.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yes.
So that's what I was saying. Maybe it was like he's mad because he won't be able to use it. But the point is...
I don't think he's thinking that.
No, he's not. But the point is, no, he thinks he's going to be president forever.
Well, he also thinks his plane is better. It's just it's not up to... it can't evade missiles.
But exactly. But here's the thing about that we kind of forget is, one, it does take a lot because these planes are basically the president's office in the sky, and they have to be incredibly protected against threats. They have to, like you said, they have to have a lot of stuff put into them. It's not that easy to just say, here, we're giving you a commercial type.
Don't tell him. Let him just use
plane.
his own.
Yeah, I know, right? But there's a lot that goes into it too. The current plane that we have right now for Air Force One, and Trump was actually correct with that, is that it's very old, so it's using a lot more fuel. Yeah. It's not environmentally friendly.
Put some solar panels on it and call it a day.
By the way,
but it is using a lot of.
I'm just kidding, of course, because I know I'm about to get a lot of hate.
No, but how funny would that be if Donald Trump suddenly comes up with the first green Air Force One? This is,
I know as the one who wants to save coal and everything. But here's the third thing too.
Yes.
The American jobs. He talks about saving jobs and bringing jobs back. All these jobs are going to be happening with Boeing here in the United States. So you take away those jobs too. That's kind of that's the antithesis of what he's standing for. So I get the spending of the money. It seems like a lot.
Seems.
Well, I mean,
Only
4
seems?
billion. No, but I mean, compared to the whole entire budget of the
Right. But
U.S.
This is the problem: is that it's like 4 billion here,
Well,
2
of
billion
course.
here, and
I do
this is
that
how
in-
Americans go broke. Is because we spend
Well,
20
of
here and
course.
50 here.
And I get it because I do production, budgets, and I'm like, oh, we'll spend a little bit here and there because it does add up. However, I'm just saying, in the big scheme of things, these planes that will be brought out in the 20s will be things that will be able to be used and be completely updated and be able to be used for years to come. And
I
yes,
agree
they
with
can
Trump.
look.
Cancel the order.
I don't agree with canceling it, but I agree with maybe looking into trimming it down.
That's all I want to say.
Yeah.
Is like, you know what? Let's see. Why does it cost so much? Look, we all hear the stories of government waste that it costs like $500 to buy a hammer because of all the red tape you have to go through.
And the $125 billion right now that in the Pentagon that apparently is wasted. Those are things to look at. But I think, just tweeting like that and talking about something that could be potentially very good for American workers and for the country and getting updated planes is something to look into without him tweeting about to everybody.
Right.
I could be more upset about tweets. I'm fine with that one.
You're all right with the tweeting.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
what
we'll
with that one?
We'll talk about the tweeting in a little bit. That one, no. Look, here's the thing. Look, he has a point. And let's take a look at it. Let's not spend all that money. Speaking of comments in YouTube, a great friend of Trump versus Hillary, our campaign show, now making the transition over to the Trump Report. Storage Yard resident, how do you like the sound of President Trump? Well, Storage Yard resident, why don't you tell us what you think of the sound of President Trump? I don't know. I think we want to start on a positive note, but we look forward to hearing your comments. So I think that's a positive, and we're about to go through the nominations and appointments and staff. Some of the people that the Trump transition team has on board, and we're probably going to have a few people that we're critical of, but the first, I think, is a great hire, and that's Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, because he ran the RNC for the last few years at a time when, maybe the RNC wasn't very popular, even amongst Republicans and conservatives. And to put it in a TV-friendly way, he's had to eat a lot of shit. He's had to go out there and be at the front of, no, this is great, we're doing, and he knows how to manage so many different kinds of moving parts. And this is a tall order, being the chief of staff of President Donald Trump. Sorry, just wanted to let it hang in the air for people watching.
That hurt.
And I think, I don't know, I think he's a great hire. And I think, Scott, you were mentioning there's sort of a great political advantage to having him be the chief of staff.
Right. I mean, he has a connection with Paul Ryan being from Wisconsin, and they've known each other for years. And obviously, he knows the political channels that'll help Trump as being the political neophyte. So out of all of his choices, and obviously he's been able to tame Trump throughout the presidential campaign. So
Obviously tamed him?
Well, tamed him in the sense of being able to keep him on what he needed to do to win, because he obviously won this election, even though it wasn't necessarily.
Talk about the 2.5 million votes.
Well, that's a whole different thing. I'm talking about the electoral college and what he
interesting,
focused
but
on.
Talk about that, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that he won.
But I'm saying, yes, and what he had to do and to deal with all the Republican discourse, I don't like him, but I'm saying as far as the choice for Trump, I think that was a solid, smart choice out of the rest of the choice.
He knows what the heck's going on.
Channels,
and
he understands.
You need to have some people like that, in your organization.
And he and Paul Ryan are friends and close, and that'll help with the Trump relationship with Paul Ryan.
As we go through the list, it becomes interesting that a guy who said that he wanted to go to Washington to drain the swamp is there's a lot of swamp things that are going to continue.
I like
to be
Scott's
there.
term.
The recycled swamp dwellers.
The swamp
I
dwellers,
like that.
The recycled swamp dwellers.
Yeah, see, again, could be our
Recycling.
be our greenest
Not the
president
kind
ever.
of recycling I'm interested
No, not the
in.
good recycling.
Peter Shahada in the chat room says Trump is going to make America great again. # MAGA.
And everybody who says that, I want to know, when was America great in their minds? And whose rights are we going to have to take away in order to restore that greatness?
Whether he's making it great again, like a certain time, I would love to see in 4 years that, America's great. I would be perfectly happy with that.
But while everybody's saying
standards?
this, yes,
What
I
is
want
the
to know when
benchmarks?
people think it was so great and how we're going to have to remove, I don't know, whose rights are we going to have to take away in order for us to get back to that time period?
And yes, I get employment's not good, but it's at 4.6% right now. So
what
do they want it to be? It's actually at a really good pace. I mean, yes, I get there's a lot of economic issues, but that's not going to change.
There's a lot of issues. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see for whom America will be made great again. But
and at what expense will that happen?
I stand
for
by
others?
the idea that I think it's pretty good right now. It was probably better when I was a kid, but I didn't have stuff to worry about. America was better when I didn't have a mortgage.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
When I was just paying rent, oh my God, America was awesome.
Actually, I lived with my parents and I wasn't paying rent.
That was even better. I'm like, oh yeah, I could go to Europe for the summer. I have all this money, So that's when America was great.
Of course, coincidentally, that was during the Clinton years of the 90s.
The summer of 2000, that's when America was great. That's when I went to Europe for the summer. I lived in my parents' house.
I was in high school.
Why do you have to make me feel old?
She had to add that in there.
Okay, well, you know what? Here's the thing. I want to make America old again, all right, Chelsea? So you're going to be left out.
The 1950s.
Except with civil rights. All right, so
Interesting.
it's an interesting point. So we're reading that. That's from our friend Storage Yard Resident. And he's saying that the 50s is when America was great, except for civil rights. It's very hard to discount the civil rights part of that, though, because they were so bad for
the women
and women's rights.
Yeah.
Also,
Gay,
tax
lesbian.
brackets then too. So I assume they want to go back to 90% tax brackets for the wealthiest, because that was a time, and we were making a lot of infrastructure things. That's when the interstate highway system was done by Eisenhower. That's when California had one of the best university systems. But we have to go back to 90% tax rate if people want to do that too.
Okay.
So.
I mean,
no, I'm just saying,
like,
if you're saying make America, that you're talking about tax cuts, then you need to go back to increasing taxes and.
So we've been
now it's the 60s.
Except the Vietnam War.
All right. So
And the civil rights.
He's going to say, the next thing Storage Yard Resident is going to say, the 70s except for disco. We'll get back to the comments in the chat room
My
in a little
mom
bit.
would very much disagree with that.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of these appointments. We've been so positive. We've been doing the show for about 10 minutes now. We've been fairly positive, some little jabs, playful ribbing. Let's talk about Senior Counselor and Chief Strategist Stephen K. Bannon. The appointment that I'll speak first, which is I personally don't believe he's a white supremacist. However, I do believe that Stephen K. Bannon is a really bad guy. So for me, that could be true. Even if it isn't, no, he's still not a good guy. Through sort of a vast network, I know people who know him a little bit, and it's, he is not a good person.
Give some details.
Just the kind of guy you don't want to have in your organization. And if maybe you work for an organization that he becomes the head of, you decide you don't want to be part of it anymore. People have told me things. I've known people who've worked a number of places, and all of a sudden Steve Bannon's in the office and they're out of the office. So, but again,
cryptic.
like we don't want to. Well, if you look at where he was, if just like in the 50s, you can't discount except for civil rights. There are these allegations, there are quotes that, he favors being white. He thinks whites are better. Okay, so that's a guy who, the smartest thing that Trump did was not appoint him chief of staff, because that was probably, that was not going to go well. So he's just he's basically, in the cartoons when you have the angel and the devil on your shoulders, well, Trump's going to have the devil, the actual real devil, and then there'll be another devil, which is Steve Bannon.
Yeah, like a devil. Yeah,
but
devil light.
Chelsea, your thoughts first on Steve Bannon.
Interesting choice. I mean, we all think of like Breitbart and alt-right, but also he goes back to Goldman Sachs, Wall Street. Trump was against, the Wall Street takeover.
Where
so
did he
this
work?
is
Citizens United. That was his organization. Hillary the movie is the basis for that
Supreme Court decision.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And he's got his hands in a lot of things where you go, wow, yeah. So I guess the old saying might be true: where there's smoke, there's evil. Scott, your thoughts on Steve Bannon? We'll start moving a little faster.
Yeah, I was
going to
say, I agree.
Nothing
with
good.
Nothing good out of that now.
There's some
not smart, and it goes back to who are you surrounding yourself with, and this is going to be a very important advisor in his day to day, and that's going to be one of his advisors. That's a little scary. Yeah,
surprising appointment, and there's a few of those. Housing and Urban Development, Dr. Ben Carson, and is part of it the meaner he was to you during the primaries, the more prestigious of a position you're going to get. In which case, I can only imagine what Ted Cruz is going to get. You know, so
this just makes zero sense. I wonder if in Trump's mind he was like, okay, urban development. Who's the black guy I know?
One black guy that I know
Dr.
that would
Carson.
yeah.
That makes
And
that's why
I'm surprised he didn't appoint Omarosa, because that's the other black person
Yeah.
that he knows.
Well, he's going for you know
He's Dr. Ben Carson.
Yes, and
she's not Dr. Omarosa.
And because maybe you know, there was the story that he grew up in thinking that because he grew up in housing and that he's somehow qualified because he grew up there as a kid.
Yeah.
Partly, I just find that that's kind of.
Well, you know, I went to Detroit once, so I can tell you about the inner city myself. So, it's I don't know. You see some of the other picks, you know, general
brain surgery is like housing because
Well,
insert good joke here. I don't know.
mean, brain surgery is hard. So, all right. You have to be skillful, but I don't know that it translates.
Skill,
because if you're a
different
good brain
skill.
surgeon, it doesn't mean that you'll be a great quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. So
Right, it's
just
different
because you're
skill
good in
sets.
one field, yeah. And you know, just because you're good as a businessman, it doesn't mean you'll be good as I don't know, president.
yeah.
Just a thought. Justice.
This is
Jeff
where the-
Sessions. Chelsea, I'm gonna sit back and let you talk about this.
Yeah.
This is-
Where do you even start with that one?
by crying. Justice in America may be a thing of the past on multiple fronts. If you're a minority, especially black, I mean, 30 years ago,
and
he,
as you say, you have a reason for saying that.
yeah, he, you know, endorsed a comment that was like, you know, people who are fighting for, or attorneys who fight for civil rights are traitors. And he said something like, maybe they are, and other not really commendable things. So I have no idea how it makes any sense. It's also not great for the marijuana progress
Right.
that we've made as a country. He's really anti, and
Right, you said it was like for smoking is what
he
stupid people do.
He liked the KKK until he found out that they smoked marijuana.
Yeah, because honestly, when any of us look at the KKK, you know, we're probably like, oh yeah, you know, the marijuana is the first problem that we have.
That's a deal
with
breaker.
It's oh, they
Was about to click on submit my monthly payment,
Right,
and then I
yes.
found out there was marijuana involved. So that's not cool, and it's just there's no
there's-
really great like, yes, this guy has a history of fighting for justice, fighting for minorities, women.
and
Justice. It's just not who you think of when you think of
You
justice.
don't. I always think of him being like this fringe, even for the Republican Party, kind of a fringe guy. And let's be honest, they were talking about earlier here on the chat room about, you know, going back to the Reagan years in the 80s. He wasn't approved for a federal judgeship in 1986 because of racial that was 30 years ago. So now all of a sudden it's supposed to be okay that, you know, so I already think he has a lot going against him for such an important role. And
Yeah.
that should be something that should be brought up again.
And
You know,
a lot of these important roles are going to require congressional approval, and you know, I think General James Mattis could be a good pick. You know, I don't know my military men one from the other. He's a retired 4-star general, so okay, sounds like he's got some qualifications. Except, of course, he happened to nominate. He happened to nominate a guy who hasn't been retired long enough.
Right.
He must not have been in active duty for the previous 7 years, which General Mattis was. So Congress needs to pass new legislation to bypass that federal
Right, they have to
law.
basically give him a waiver because that happened in the 1940s, and this is a law going back to 1947. They have to be that used to be 10 years, now it's down to 7.
Yeah.
But because they want to keep civilian control of the military, which is an important thing, and yes, you know, it's 4 years or whatever. I think he retired in 2013. So
Yeah.
whatever. Now we're just kind of
Well, it's not like
But-
it's not like it's 6.5 years. You know, it's not like
Yeah.
you know what, close enough, fine. Yeah, here's a waiver. So I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, and I mean the way that Congress is aligned, I don't know, probably will get it. But
I'm sure he will. John McCain's already said he supports the waiver.
there's
and,
another
you
guy
know.
who, you know, you would think if you were John McCain, you would just be like, all right, anything that Trump wants, I'm going to say no, because, you know, he was very disparaging, not just of his service, but of being captured. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think I wonder sometimes when I see an appointment like that, a guy who is probably qualified but not eligible. So is that just to be like, oh yeah, don't worry, I can get it through. Did Trump just say like, I'll get this, don't worry. Everybody owes me for some reason. I don't know why he thinks. And if anybody in the chat room wants to chime in as to why they think that General Mattis would be the right appointment, please let us know. Or you can tweet us at Trump Report ABTV. Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Scott,
this is another reason not to have children because they're not going to be educated.
Right. I mean,
everybody go homeschool because if you don't get a voucher, you're going to go to a crappy school that's got no funding.
Right.
I like to think I live in a good school district, though, so we'll see. But what are the concerns about Betsy? Whichever one of you wants to go first.
I was going to say, well, first of all, it's funny. I know the DeVos family, not personally, but growing up in Orlando, her father-in-law had bought the Orlando Magic, and you always would hear stuff about the family. And he started Amway, the big pyramid schemes. And all that.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah.
That's
so
how he's a billionaire.
I don't know if I need to know any more about the family. They created Amway.
So yes, her father-in-law did. She's a billionaire. A philanthropist that has absolutely no experience in the education system, and what's important is that we do need to dedicate towards public schools, and all she wants to do is she's pro-school voucher, which destroys public education. And we already at a turning point with education, as we can see clearly when people fall for fake news and other things, that we really should be focused in investing in public schools. Instead, she wants to do the complete opposite, and obviously teachers and everything are strongly against this appointment. It's an awful appointment. Again, he's supposed to surround himself with the best people, and that's the best person for education secretary.
A billionaire who doesn't have kids in public education.
Yeah.
Did she ever have kids in public education?
No, of course not.
I didn't think so.
My thoughts on these private school vouchers are that they're great for the kids who are able to get them.
Yeah.
So
Then that's the problem.
And anybody
That's
who
the
saw that
operative word.
documentary, Waiting for Superman,
Yes.
it's heartbreaking.
Yes.
You can see the kids who go on, and you're like, well, it's going to be great for them. What about everybody else
Exactly.
who is in the public schools? And my wife and I, we plan to send our son to public school because we can't afford private school. So we would like our public school here in the Valley to, be a good one. And we hope that continues. But you start giving out more of these private school vouchers, then parents like us become concerned. But it's always something that people who feel really strongly that the voucher program is what's going to make it better, I always say, fine, explain to me how that works. And anybody who'd like to, please comment on the chat room or at Trump Report ABTV, for those listening after the fact, and we will share your comments on a future show.
Because I haven't heard a good argument to the voucher program, except for people that want to be able to take their kids out of a school that they think is not very good and put them in somewhere else.
And if they're successful, because just because you want your kid to go to, say you live in North Hollywood, and this is very local, but because we're in North Hollywood, and you're like, well, the Burbank School District is just a couple minutes away and it's better, I would like to send my kid there. And then it's like, well, why do you get to do that? Why can't just everyone in North Hollywood do that? And then what happens to the North Hollywood school?
Exactly.
And again,
That's
keeping it
a big
local,
problem.
because that's what we do here at AfterBuzz. Speaking of fake news, National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, his pick for the NSA, apparently asked for security clearance for his son, who spread conspiracy theories, including the Pizzagate, which is a terrible story if you read about. A man in North Carolina over the weekend went into this alleged, well, it's not an alleged pizza parlor. This pizza parlor where things were alleged. Although I haven't tasted the pizza. I've been to some alleged pizza parlors in my day, mostly since I moved to California. Right. But, and so anyway, we'll call him Lil Flynn, Flynn Jr., was a guy who spread a lot of conspiracy theories and fake news. And the Trump transition team has basically had to, distance themselves from this guy, despite the fact there was anybody who wants to see a fun video, watch Jake Tapper talking to Mike Pence today, where he literally asked him 8 times to explain this. And finally, Pence had to say something, and that was the answer that, everybody's run with since. Jake Tapper on CNN. And again, to Chelsea's point, you're supposed to surround yourself with the best and brightest. Okay, but you're not necessarily doing that just because you're like, my kid needs a job. let me give him a. Oh, your kid who has the byline on the story about the child molester pizza parlor. Yeah, great. Go ahead. Give him a desk. Give an office near the window and security clearance. So, there have been some hiccups already, and you feel like
very pleasant.
We're trying to be very positive here in the Trump report.
Well, I guess my bit of positive news is that in the last month, I've gotten a lot of communications from friends who've before been like supportive of me becoming political and being on this show, to now they're like, okay, I need to watch, I need to get involved, I can't just sit on my ass.
Right.
I have kids and I want them to grow up in a great country, and I need to get involved. And that sentiment is the most hopeful thing, because the worst thing, more dangerous than Trump himself, is American apathy.
Right. I was just going to say apathy is definitely.
And now
the worst
think
thing.
people are woken up, and I just hope that they don't have this like frenzied woken up, because that won't last 4 years. Good luck if it lasts 4 months. We need a general sense of awake alertness and concern to get you through 4 years. This like, oh my God thing for 4 years is just not going to fly. So we all got to do a little calm down, but wake up and stay alert and stay on this.
And be in it for the long run, which I'll get into later about the Moral Mondays thing and the North Carolina governor race. But that is something that's very important. But I was just going to quickly go back to Michael Flynn. The thing that is very scary about his appointment is, one, it never has to be approved by Congress.
Yeah.
And two, because he's going to be involved with such sensitive information. Here's a guy that has been working with conspiracy theories and believes conspiracy theories. That's a very frightening thing for me to think about. And I'm sure for a lot of people to think about, that this man now will be able to be getting top secret information on a daily basis, and again be advising the president on what to do with these type of threats that are happening around the world. And it's a very scary thing when you have someone that's invested in these conspiracy type stories and stuff. And
do you both think that Donald Trump has a folder of things that he, basically in mid-afternoon on January 20th, he's going to, go down in the NSA bunker, and he's like, all right, I need to look up all these people who've wronged me over the years, and finally I'm going to find out if I'm right about my assumption. Because I can't say I wouldn't. I'm like, oh, I can look up anything on anybody. Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. And you feel like maybe he'll have somebody do it for him, maybe Ben, and go down in the basement and let me know what you can dig up. But
well, people who know him say he's a vengeful person, so it wouldn't be out of character.
I don't know him, and I'll say he's a vengeful person.
I mean that's like pure Nixonian right there.
Yeah.
Like, let's just start going on the enemies list and go through. And obviously Nixon was very paranoid, and there seems a lot of these attributes with Trump, and didn't like the press, and it's very similar to sort of Trump's mentality. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he wanted to do something like that.
They say only Nixon could go to China, and apparently only Donald Trump could talk to Taiwan.
I would say only Trump can go to Taiwan.
Yeah, but he hasn't gone yet. And
no, I know, but I'm just saying.
Do you think that's an issue of not knowing the protocol,
he had no idea,
or not caring, or both? Because I think he didn't know, and so he has the conversation, and he finds out, oh, you weren't supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And he's like, I'm the president. What are you going to do? And China, there's a lot of talk about Russia. Let's try to leave them, but you don't really want to get China too upset.
He's already talked badly about them a lot, so
through the campaign.
And just think about how much of our debt they own. And I mean, at some point they're going to be annoyed that we haven't paid them.
And the biggest populated country with the biggest army, and obviously is diametrically, completely separate political structure than we have. So. There's already a lot there. There's already that fine line of tension brewing. But yeah, they basically own us. So for all intents and purposes,
it's true.
So we don't want to piss them off too much.
See, that the election of Trump disproves my theory that I just expected at some point that the White House was going to be run by a puppet for the Chinese. But we don't have that yet.
No.
But maybe in a few years that we'll get a Chinese approved sleeper agent or something who will take over. But I want to make sure we get to this. So I want to move to a segment that we're going to have here on the show whenever we have it. And there's 2 parts to it. Scott will have the second part. But the progressive silver lining. Maybe we'll even come up with a jingle for it.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
Is there a dance to go along with
it? I said maybe. But at the very least, a graphic maybe we'll come up with. But Chelsea, you posted this earlier this week. There was some good news about the Dakota pipeline. Standing Rock story. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Good
Okay.
news
So
for
I
the
don't know
progressives.
how much we talked about this because I get sometimes my shows confused about what I talk about on Justice is Served and this show, but I don't think we've talked about the Dakota Access Pipeline.
We talked
here.
about the Dakota Access Pipeline a lot on
did.
the New York Mets wrap-up show.
Oh, I was like, we did on this show too. I
No,
remember
but we
we
did.
did.
But we didn't talk about it that much, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
I know we talked about it, but not that much.
All right, so thousands of people have gone to stand with the water protectors, including this weekend veterans. I've heard somewhere range of like 2,000 to 5,000 veterans, so I don't know exactly how many. But the word is that it wasn't going to look great for police to be blasting veterans with freezing cold water and rubber bullets, so they decided to pull the permit for the easement, they being the Army Corps of Engineers. And so this was a big win. And I, Facebooked a lot of, excited emojis and like, this could be the end. And then hours later, it was like, not so fast because Energy Partners, I guess is the name of the company that is putting in the pipeline. They're like, we don't care. We're going to go ahead anyway. We'll pay the fine, perhaps of like $50,000. And they've also filed a lawsuit. So it is a
So the silver lining
battle
is not so silver at the moment.
Well, the battle has been won. The war
still
remains to be
ongoing.
seen.
Still
But
be
there was
fought.
also a really beautiful scene of veterans apologizing to the American Indians about what we took from them and how we've treated them. And so there is some positive, conscious, great stuff happening outside of our government. If I wish that the government would do more. It wouldn't be hard to either name the site something protected like
Right. Like I feel like Obama's been a little slow on doing this,
so
which I was
slow,
hoping at this point
pathetically slow.
I would love him to be more involved before he leaves office.
Absolutely.
And he, so I would have.
I have no idea what his deal is because if Trump gets to make the decision, he'll likely support the pipeline because it's said that he has investments in companies that are in the pipeline. So, it's not just about a pipeline. It's not just about Native Americans. If we put in this pipeline, it makes it harder, more expensive to do alternative energy because now this pipeline has to be profitable. And so it throws off the economics. If you're a true capitalist, you cannot believe in this pipeline because capitalism the free market would say that alternative energies should start taking over, and we're inflating sort of the value of oil, even though it's gone down, by putting things in like this pipeline. And yes, it's a danger to our water. It's a danger to our
that's the
environment.
big thing I was going to say, the environmental danger.
They
we
leak.
hear a lot about the
Right, and
We
going
don't
underneath
hear
their water
enough about
and-
it, yes.
Yeah.
But they are really
Absolutely.
bad. So it's like good news, but then it's like, kind of not so as great as when I first posted
We're
about
going to
it.
go ahead and give a B- to that silver lining because it's not as silver as it was. It's a bit of a bronze lining at the moment. But Scott,
Kind of like my health insurance plan. Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
what's about to happen
The
in
price
January.
is, oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyways.
That's a
But
whole
yeah,
other.
that's
That's a whole
a-
other story.
And you know what? You can't.
that will
You
be-
can't even blame Trump for that. So
Well, we can blame the Republicans who have not allowed for
Right, the full implementation of it across different, across the
things
states.
that would
and-
allow the price of medical to go down, like prescription drug.
But then how would the drug companies make any money? I don't
I
understand
know the
your
poor
theory.
things. I know.
Yeah.
I feel so horrible for them.
But you have another silver lining, Scott. The North Carolina governor's race.
Yes, after a very, very contentious
and
race.
I don't understand how it took quite so long because it took a month. But anyway.
Well, it took a month because Pat McCrory did not want to concede and kept saying, their whole philosophy was, well, if Trump won by 3 points in the state and Burr won re-election, all the Republicans were winning, then it made sense that Pat McCrory should have won. But it goes to show, and I've had this discussion with people too, is that when it's all said and done, for the presidential race, it tends to be more party preference. Like if you're a Republican, you're going to vote for your Republican candidate. If you're a Democrat, you're going to vote for your Democratic candidate. But when it comes to the gubernatorial races, you tend to have people that are voting on the person. So that's why you end up getting Republican governors in very Democratic states and vice versa.
Mitt Romney was the governor of Massachusetts. I know there's
Exactly.
a lot of
Charlie
conservatives
Baker
there,
is the current governor of Massachusetts, also Republican, and Larry Hogan in Maryland, and so you get
George
these happening
Pataki was the governor of New York
for 12 years, and so you get a lot of this because it's more on the actual individual person, and then of course what this person did, and Pat McCrory obviously was very responsible for HB2, which is the bathroom law for transgender people in North Carolina, and it took a huge economic hit, and the majority of North Carolinians did not support it. And also,
Thank God.
they had a thing which I thought about you, Chelsea, as I imagine you would have been involved if you were in North Carolina, was the Moral Monday, which is the Moral Monday thing, and this is sort of the long game of what we're talking about with progressives being involved with. This was every week, progressive religious backers would go in and they would be protesting the things that the state of North Carolina was doing, which Pat McCrory was involved with when it came to, and they were getting arrested for peaceful, protesting.
Yeah.
And it was something that went on every single week beginning in 2013. It was interesting.
How did I not know about this?
It was actually a pretty big thing, and it actually spread to South Carolina and Georgia a little bit too. It was a very big thing that they did, and it was the long game, and they kept it going, and they kept everything that he was doing and the government in the news. The interesting thing about Pat McCrory, he lost in Charlotte, where he's former mayor. He also lost. He ran in 2008 when Obama first ran for office, and as you know, North Carolina went very slimly to Obama, and also that's when they elected Bev Perdue. So she was only in for one term. She decided not to run for re-election. The other interesting fact about McCrory is he's the first sitting governor of North Carolina to lose re-election since they reinstated that in 1976. So it's a pretty big deal that he did not win re-election. A lot of it has to do with the things that he was involved with. And it was a very slim win. I mean, it was only 10,000 votes for Roy Cooper, but considering what was going on and the headwinds were in the Republicans' favor, it's pretty remarkable that he actually did end up losing.
And to your point that people vote for the person for governor, they really didn't like him.
No, they did not.
Because they're like, yeah, I'm voting Republican, not that guy. And that's interesting. So
yeah, it was just over the threshold because in the state you have to have below 10,000, and it's a state paid for recount. But he was just over 10,000 votes, which meant it had to be personally paid for the recount. And it's very good that he finally decided to concede, because I thought he was going to stretch this out and pack the state Supreme Court with Republican, skewing conservative judges. The great news, though, about this is that having a Democrat governor in a battleground state will make a very big difference when it comes to the 2020 presidential election, because now you're going to have someone who's going to be in favor of expanding the voter rights for the state of North Carolina, for having expanded early voting hours. You're going to have a governor who does not believe in HB2 and the transgender law and will not be supporting that. So you have a lot of very positive things for progressives, especially as we move in the future into the 18 and 20 races, but just alone and knowing that North Carolina is going to stand up to a lot of these Trump policies, and that's a very, very exciting thing. And he's the only governor.
He gets an A+.
I was just going to say, you get an A+ for your silver lining.
Well,
because
no,
look
I was
how
just saying.
excited you are.
Well, no, I am, and he's the only governor that lost their re-election bid this election as well. So there's a lot that I think it shows that Americans will not put up with these discriminatory practices anymore, and that's a warning to the federal government as well. If you're trying to take away women's rights and LGBT rights, you're going to see that you're going to get a backlash. It didn't work in Indiana, as we saw. It didn't work in North Carolina. It's not going to work federally.
I hope it works in the marijuana laws, because I read that 2 million more people voted for marijuana in Florida than voted for Trump. And so if they now try and roll back our rights in that regard, people might get really pissed off.
They will. They absolutely will. And California is going to be in the forefront of suing the federal government if they try to get involved. Because here, again, Republicans are all about states' rights. How can you be for states' rights, but then tell them you can't, have your state right of marijuana that you legalize by a big margin?
So at the end of the day, for Pat McCrory, not a good turn of events, not a good cycle. I think our president-elect would call you a loser.
Except he'll probably end up in Trump's cabinet now as a recycled swamp dweller.
That's a good point. So we have the progressive silver lining.
We're going to have that as a segment every week. Who is this week's recycled swamp dweller?
And please send us yours if you know of any at
Elaine
Trump Report ABTV. See, there you go. We only have a few more minutes already. Just flies by like in the old days, back 2 months ago. And
there's a little bit of silver. I had a kind of progressive silver lining to kind of help.
Sure.
My B- efforts.
We don't grade on a curve here, but go ahead. You have one.
What about extra credit, though?
Here's my attempt. Okay, progressives and Sarah Palin agree on something.
Oh, that's just scary. It's like the world is ending. They agree on something.
But they all like hockey? I don't even know what they could possibly agree on.
Okay, so this deal where Trump saved,
the carrier
1,000 jobs
Mm-hmm.
from Carrier moving to, I don't know where
Mexico.
Mexico.
From Indiana.
Right.
Convenient that the vice president-elect is the governor of Indiana. Tax
Convenient.
benefits.
Right.
But
So, this was a big, Trump win because he, delivered on his promise that he was going to force companies to stay and keep jobs in America. But if you look sort of behind the curtains, you see that there was a massive tax break. Upward, it's like worth 70 million.
$70 million, some
So
crazy.
Sarah Palin called it crony capitalism.
Yeah.
Hello, this is where I get a big reaction and like
Yeah.
extra credit points.
Yeah. Not to mention there's still going to be thousands of jobs. They're still going to Mexico
It's a solid
from the carrier
B,
deal.
all right? It's not a B- anymore. But
okay.
it's all right.
I'll
Look,
take it.
you're gonna get into a good college with a B. All right, don't worry about it. That's a good average. And Scott will write to you from his Ivy League college. So
hook
we
me
have
up.
progressive silver lining, but it'll be a little bit of a progressive buzzkill because Scott before mentioned the possibility of a recount in the gubernatorial race there in North Carolina. I just feel like it's worth pointing out because people, post so many things still and online, and this is all that they're holding hope on to. Jill Stein, for whatever reason, wants to raise all this money for all the recounts. Okay, you can do that, but these margins they're pretty big. In a lot of cases, they're things like 70,000.
Ironically, in some states, had all her voters gone to Hillary, it would have changed the outcome.
Well, and those states were, and I get the concern is the fact that these states had been Democratic since the 80s and they won by such relatively slim numbers.
Margins where
when you're talking about 80,000 votes across the three states as opposed to the nearly 3 million vote plurality for Hillary Clinton, and you're thinking that 80,000 votes in those three states for states that have gone Democratic for 30 years. It's a concern, but then again, I do feel like there is no hurt in doing the recount because it proves that there isn't anything nefarious going on. But it's not going to change anything.
It's not going to change anything.
It's not going to change
here's
anything.
the thing, that's going to happen. Whether it happens or not. There's so many people. Even our dear friend Drexel Hurd will post about this occasionally. The fact that the Electoral College can vote for someone else, and he's like, he's sort of fancies the idea that on, I think it's December 19th.
Yes, December 19th, at 2 p.m. in the state capitol.
That they'll do the right thing. I'm using air quotes for people listening, and vote for Hillary. That's not going to happen. Just know that these people. There's going to be a couple. But you would need them all to do it.
You would need like 30, yes.
Yeah, and there was also the...
One has quit because he doesn't want to do it.
Which is...
And one has said a Republican has said he's not going to give it to Trump.
But one in Washington State has also said they were not going to vote for Hillary, so that already put you down.
So that already put you down, yeah. So
and actually... And in trying to look for the good news in that, because for a while I was like, oh my God, maybe the Electoral College can save us. Because there is a valid argument to that this is a job of the Electoral College, is to save the voters from ourselves when we choose somebody who's utterly disqualified. But to me, it feels a little bit like the big bailout of Wall Street, where it saved us and it was probably necessary, but it just made us go like, oh, whatever, we can go back to sleep now because everything's fine.
Right.
And if that would happen, I think American apathy would go back up again. See, we can just sit back and
doesn't matter.
let the system take care of it.
See,
so it's better.
And we talked about this in the final episode of Trump versus Hillary, that you're basically kind of undoing the foundation that the election system is built on. For whatever reason, I understand the Electoral College had to do with slave rights and all that.
And
but
give smaller
it's the system
states.
that's in place.
Right.
You don't get to change it now.
Well, you
don't
could.
get
Actually,
to
you
tell-
could.
You could, and I think it is something that needs to be brought up. It will never happen with the Republican control in the state houses and the federal level right now, but it is something because when you see two candidates in 16 years now lose the popular vote, lose the Electoral College vote, but win the popular vote, that is a concern.
And this is a wide margin.
And this time it's a huge margin. Only John Quincy Adams, in the percentage-wise, had a bigger popular vote loss than Donald Trump. Obviously, bigger numbers-wise for Donald Trump. But that is a problem. I think the silver lining, though, what you're saying, another silver lining for progressives, is the fact that if Hillary Clinton would have won this term, it would have meant more losses for us at the federal and state level in 2018. It
And
would probably
Americans
been a
would have
likely,
gone to sleep.
and it would have been a likely loss for her in 2020. It would have been harder to win re-election because it just doesn't work well with having the same presidential party hold more than 2 terms, 3 terms. It's very difficult. So now we actually have a chance to take back some control, although likely unlikely in 2018, but at least in 2020.
Right.
With the new census and everything else. So.
To put a button on it, it's not happening. You need to look beyond it.
Right, but we do need to look beyond it and make
In a
changes.
couple weeks, you'll have to look beyond it. But,
Right.
there's still people holding out hope that day something...
I mean, I don't know.
I'm
With
still
this
holding out hope
election,
with this
it's
year.
crazy.
Anything's
Who
possible,
knows?
right? You never know. Everything's possible, and I will hold out hope until December 19th. But there does need to be changes, and I think that is something down the road the Electoral
I
College
think
needs
down
to be
the
looked
road
at.
the conversation can happen. I
Absolutely.
don't think it's going to happen 2 weeks from now.
Oh, anytime soon
And
now.
the fact that you have electors who, or at least the one who's resigned because they didn't want it. Okay, that's more likely to happen
Mm-hmm.
than anything else. Because if you feel like you can't fulfill your duty, you're just going to step down. But
And your Republic, the slate of electors are going to be the ones from their party, so that's why you're not going to see this big swing of Trump or GOP electors of their state now suddenly voting for Hillary. You're just not going to see that huge number of people, unfortunately, that make that change. But I definitely think the Electoral College is archaic and needs to be revamped because it doesn't work. It's not fair for even Republican voters in California, for instance. Their vote doesn't count, essentially.
they don't need to vote. It's true.
But that's crazy, and there's something wrong with that, and then vice versa. Like
Well-
a Democratic voter in Alabama never has their vote count. I mean, it's those type of things that are really kind of crazy when you think about it.
Well, it's like the Boeing deal. Hey, let's take a look at it. Let's figure out what's wrong
Like
with it
maybe
and see if
split
we
it
can
out.
fix it somewhere in the
Congressional
future.
district or something like Nebraska and Maine do. There's definitely things that should be discussed about that, though.
But speaking of focusing on the future, we need to look ahead towards next week because we're out of time. We will be back next Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. That is our regular time, 10 p.m. Eastern. So for myself, Christian Blatt, I'm on Twitter at ChristianDMZ. For Scott Moore at SMan80. Chelsea Galicia at Chelsea Galicia. Don't forget at Trump Report ABTV. And please post your questions, comments, concerns. Follow us there.
Lots
like
of
us on
concerns.
YouTube.
Lots.
Comment and rate on iTunes. Thanks for everybody in the chat room. Special thanks, Storage Yard resident, for making the transition to the new show. And we will see you all next Tuesday.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.